try and uphold the highest standards and practices, and I let the side.
When Queen Elizabeth II's final will was read, it wasn't just about inheritance, it was a revelation. Secrets were uncovered, traditions were broken, and the royal family was left speechless.
The prince will also stop using his Royal Highness title in any official capacity.
Why was Prince Andrew chosen to read it? What unexpected gifts were left to Prince Harry? And what final message did the Queen leave behind for the future of the monarchy? This wasn't just a will, it was her last, powerful move.
Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, issued a statement in tribute to his mother. He said, "Your Majesty, it has been an honor and privilege to serve you."
What happened behind those palace walls may change everything. As word spread that the Queen had died, Buckingham Palace was the center of attention around the world. The mood was sad, and feelings were running high inside the palace walls. The outside world saw carefully planned rituals and rules, but inside, the royal family was going through a very personal time that was a mix of grief and the weight of their royal duty. What followed was something that many people did not see coming. People who are close to the family say that Prince Andrew was given the job of reading Queen Elizabeth II's will. A lot of people were surprised by this move, especially since he has been in a lot of trouble lately. In the past, people might have thought that King Charles, as the eldest son and current king, would handle such a sensitive issue. Princess Anne, who is known for being responsible and steady, could have also been a good pick. But Andrew was the one who opened the letter with the Queen's last wishes inside. The will wasn't just important because it stated what property or things would be given to others. After 70 years in power, Queen Elizabeth had more than just money. She had also left a legacy. There was a link between this document and her power, her ties, and how she changed the monarchy. This wasn't just a legal reading. It was a time that would affect the future of the royal family and maybe even change how it worked from now on. People who know a lot about the house said that the family got together in a quiet room. A heavy feeling filled the air, not only of sadness, but also of hope. Everyone knew that the Queen had given her last wishes a lot of thought. Wax was used to seal the package, which is a traditional sign of importance. There was silence in the room for a short time while Prince Andrew held it. The only sounds were the rustling of clothes and the faraway hum of cars outside the palace gates. Though Andrew barely made a sound when he broke the seal, everyone in the room could hear it much better. It was a sign that the moment they had all been waiting for had finally come. With care, he opened the pages and started to read, his hands shaking a little. This was a simple saying, but in that situation it had a lot of emotional weight. The first line of the will was clear. "This is my last will and testament." Everyone in the room knew that the Queen, who is known for her calm public looks and diplomatic restraint, had written something important and personal. News reports say that the family had a range of responses. Even though King Charles seemed calm, some people noticed that his jaw tensed up a bit as the reading started. As usual, Princess Anne stayed calm, and it was hard to read her face. William and Kate sat close to each other with blank looks on their faces. Prince Harry, who had flown in from another country, also didn't say much. There were no protests or outbursts right away. Everyone there knew that they were seeing the end of an important part of British history. The choice to have Prince Andrew read the will could have been made for business or personal reasons. Some people think that the Queen was giving her second son a job that would make him look good in front of the public while he was doing something responsible. Others believe it could have been a sign that she loved all of her children, no matter what was going on in their lives. The silence during this part of the show was what made it stand out. Even as the Queen spoke, the room was very quiet, almost as if people were praying. In royal tradition, looks, rank, and duty are often very important. But at that moment, the people in Buckingham Palace were just a family listening to their matriarch's last words. At this point, the full text of the will hadn't been released, but the way it started gave away hints of a message that went beyond the distribution of estates and heirlooms. It seemed like this document would carry more than just directions. It would also show how the Queen's values of service, unity, and resilience are lived out. Remember that Queen Elizabeth lived through almost all of the important events of the 20th and early 21st centuries. She lived through wars, social movements, governmental changes, and a world that was changing quickly. She rarely made choices on the spot. People who knew her well said she liked stability and balance more than drama. So it's likely that the decisions she made in her last will were well thought out and carefully written. The news around this time was guarded but interesting. Journalists talked about possible family fights, especially since there were already public disagreements between some family members. As Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have taken a break from their royal tasks, many people wondered if they would be included. A few people asked what, if any, part Prince Andrew would play in the future. But that day, when the will was read, there was less talk of guesses and more quiet respect. At least that's what people who were there said they saw. A moment of silence. Expectations, duties, and public attention had kept this family apart for a long time. Now, they were all in the same room. They were more than just names or faces in the news. They were grieving sons, daughters, grandkids, and siblings. While people have always been interested in the royal family, this event served as a warning that behind the crowns and ceremonies are real people with real feelings. The Queen's will may have palaces, jewelry, and historical artifacts, but it also had her last words, her last chance to give advice, show gratitude, and maybe even change the next part of the monarchy. In the days that followed, Buckingham Palace didn't say anything directly about what was written in the will. The silence told a lot. It made it seem like what was said behind closed doors was very personal. Privacy is a shield for the royal family all the time, and this time was no different. But it also gave people time to think. When the Queen died, a long era came to an end, and her will seemed to be her last act of rule. There were still a lot of questions for the family as they got ready to move forward under King Charles III. Would the Queen's last wishes make things better or cause more arguments? Would her message bring her family closer together or show how far apart they had become? No one was sure. For 70 years, the Queen had been in charge of the kingdom. At that point in time, she had not only a lot of money, but also a huge collection of important historical things, personal items, and royal estates. However, the decisions she made in this will were not just about giving away property. They were used to send messages, and people who knew how important royal custom was could not miss those messages. Princess Anne's oldest son, Charles, who is now king, was the first person Prince Andrew talked to. He was given Windsor Castle by the Queen. It is a famous home that has been an important part of royal life for many generations. There was no surprise in this. Charles had spent his whole life getting ready to be king, and Windsor stood for consistency. It was expected, right? And in line with customs that go back hundreds of years. Still, people who saw Charles said he didn't seem very emotional when the will was read out loud. Some saw this as the behavior of someone who is used to doing their job. Some people asked him if he had hoped for more. The Queen's only daughter, Princess Anne, came next. In the will, she was thanked for her unwavering care and loyalty. The Queen's words showed appreciation and respect. It wasn't a big surprise at this point, though. As she always does, Anne kept a cool face. She had always done what she was supposed to do without complaining, working behind the scenes and not getting as much attention as her boys. For many, she stood for the more stable side of the monarchy. She was loyal, hardworking, and unwilling to give in. So far, the will has shown that this view is correct. Then something happened that no one saw coming. There was a quiet sense of surprise in the room as Andrew read the next part. The Queen had made a very unusual choice about Balmoral Castle, the private Scottish estate where she usually spent the summers. Balmoral wasn't just another house for her. It had a lot of special meaning to her. There, away from the formalities of Buckingham Palace and the things she had to do for the government in London, she had made many of her best memories. In the past, lands like Balmoral were given to the current monarch or a clear heir. That's always been the case. Queen Elizabeth had picked a different road this time, though. Instead of giving Balmoral to just one family member, she chose to split it up among everyone in the family. The will said that the estate would be handled by all direct descendants and be open to them all. This was very strange. Royal lands are usually passed down to support the idea of linear succession, which means that there is one clear line of inheritance and one person who is responsible. But the Queen had chosen to break with that custom. There was more than just surprise in the room's silence after this news came out. It had to do with what this decision meant. Sharing a large farm like Balmoral wasn't just a smart idea, it was a sign. Balmoral had always been more than just a house and some land. It was where the royal family went to hang out with each other and celebrate birthdays and holidays without cameras around. The Queen had felt most like herself there. By making Balmoral a shared place, she showed how the family could be together. There was no intention to reward or punish one child over another. It was about finding a way for the family to stay together, even if things got rough between them. Over many years, the Queen had seen both public and private fights in her own family. She had seen brothers grow apart, kids go their own ways, and grandchildren deal with the stress of being royal. It's possible that she shared Balmoral to tell them that they were still a family, even though they had titles. Royal experts and observers said that this move could have been an attempt to keep the peace, if not in their minds, then at least in their sense of duty. Balmoral would be a place where everyone in the family could come together, make choices, and take care of something that belonged to everyone. Some people saw it as the last act of power. Some people saw it as a sign of hope. In either case, it wasn't what was expected. It had been known for a long time that the royal family had fights and tensions. In public, comments often seemed to promote unity, but people on the inside knew that many relationships had become tense. Sharing one of the Queen's most valuable estates was a strong message that peace, or at least the ability to live together, was still possible. The family sat quietly as the will was read once more. Each person was probably thinking about what Balmoral meant to them. Outsiders saw it as an ancient building in the Scottish Highlands. The people in the room thought of family gatherings, conversations by the fire, and vacations from their youth. They could put aside their public roles for a while and just be a family there. The Queen didn't just talk about land, it was about leaving a lasting mark and making it clear that the future of the monarchy should be about more than just tradition and bloodline. It should be about getting along. A word that wasn't used very often in royal wills was unity. But in this one, it was in every line. In many ways, the Queen had seen her family grow apart, and she had also seen how that separation had changed how people saw the royal family. She may have thought that by splitting up Balmoral, they would have a reason to keep coming back to each other. It was a very personal choice that had never been made before. Some people who know how the Queen thinks say that she wanted Balmoral to stay a safe place for the whole family, not just one heir. Her choice emphasized something she had believed all through her reign, that power comes from working together, not from splitting up. People in the room didn't respond too strongly, but it was clear what it meant. It wasn't just a break from custom, it was a test. Sharing a property as big and important as Balmoral would require people to work together, be honest, and value each other. For a family that often fights, this would be a big job. Later, when news of the will started to spread, a lot of people were interested in this strange move. People who wrote about it called it an act of soft power by the Queen to try to change how the family works even after she died. Others pointed out that it showed a bigger shift in the monarchy, which values adaptability, openness, and shared responsibility more than strict order. Some people were not sure if this choice would actually bring the family closer together or make things worse. It can be hard to manage property as a group, especially when it has a lot of emotional value. But maybe that was the point. They weren't getting peace from the Queen. She was just giving them a reason to look for it. The family kept their cool as Prince Andrew kept reading. But they couldn't get over how important what they had just heard was. Balmoral would no longer belong to just one royal family. They would all have equal rights to it. It was still unclear whether that would bring them closer together or separate them even more. Andrew turned the page and kept reading. This time, the story was about Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, two younger members of the royal family. The choices the Queen made about these two people would become some of the most talked about parts of her will. A gift left for Catherine was the first thing that was talked about. The Queen's will said that Catherine would get the Vladimir tiara, which is one of the most expensive and well-known pieces of royal jewelry. The tiara has a beautiful design and a long history. It was once owned by Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna of Russia and has been passed down through generations. It became a sign of grace, power, and tradition because Queen Elizabeth wore it to many important events. Catherine's response was quiet. People in the room said she wasn't showing much emotion, but there was a small flicker in her eyes that showed the gift was important to her. The tiara was more than just jewelry. It was a message. The Queen's trust in Catherine and her faith in her future role in the government were both shown by the gift. By giving it to Catherine, the Queen reinforced the idea that she was not only a member of the family, but also someone who would one day be a big part of how the family looked in public and what their duties were. The tone changed as Prince Andrew went on. Prince Harry was the next name in the will. Many people thought that Harry would not be involved in the Queen's final plans because he had decided to take a break from royal tasks and move abroad with Meghan Markle. People were very aware of how Harry and his family's relationships were getting worse, especially after talks and comments that made things worse. What was read next, though, caught everyone by surprise. The Queen left her grandson Harry a silver box that used to belong to her father, King George VI. The box, which held letters and notes from the former king, was an important item. It wasn't worth a lot of money, but it had emotional and historical value. People said that the letters inside were about leadership, family, and how hard it is to be a ruler during a war. The room stopped for a moment as Andrew read what the Queen had said about the silver box. Even though there were physical and emotional gaps between them, the gift seemed like an attempt to make peace. A personal note from a grandma to her grandson. People who were there said they could not read Harry's face. He just sat there and listened. It wasn't clear if the gift made them feel better or sad. It was clear, though, that the Queen hadn't forgotten about him. She picked something that linked him directly to his background, to the royal legacy he had left behind, but was still a part of. There was clear tension in the room because of this addition. It was said that Prince William, who had played a more traditional part in the royal family, moved in his seat. People around him saw that he kept his cool, but they also saw that his jaw tightened and his eyes briefly went to his brother. William had done what the royal family wanted him to do. He had taken on more public tasks, helped bring the monarchy up to date, and helped his father become king. From his point of view, Harry's choice to step back had caused a rift. Still, he was named in their grandmother's will, which meant that he was still trusted with something important in terms of history and feeling. At the same time, it was hard for King Charles. It didn't seem like the Queen was being mean to Charles by leaving something personal for Harry, but it did serve as a reminder of how confusing family life has been over the past few years. Symbols are important to the Queen, and the silver box was one of many symbols. Queens passed it down from a past king to a prince who had chosen a different path. It held the thoughts of that king. Andrew kept reading without saying anything, moving past the quick looks and blank stares. The next part of the will was given back to Princess Anne. In this case, it wasn't just words of thanks. The Queen had left her Sandringham estate, which is another very important property for the royal family. Sandringham in Norfolk has been an important part of the royal family's Christmas practices for a long time. It was also the place where many important family meetings took place over the years. Anne had never wanted to be in the center. She was known for how hard she worked and how serious she was about royal life. At this very moment, though, the Queen showed how much she valued her daughter's steady presence and service. It wasn't just an honor to receive Sandringham. It was also a big duty. At the very least, it was clear that the Queen trusted Anne to keep upholding the ideals of the monarchy. Again, Anne didn't say much in response. People who know her say she doesn't show much feeling, either in public or in private. That being said, she knew what the gift meant. For many years, her mother had been very proud of Sandringham. Now it was her turn to take care of and protect it. Prince Edward, the Queen's youngest son, was the next name that was said. For him, she had left Bagshot Park, which was now officially his home, even though he had lived there before. Even though this didn't seem as important as the other announcements, it did have its own value. The king has always trusted Edward, and he has taken on more duties over the years, often without being noticed. In her speech, the Queen called him someone who worked quietly but was very important. Even though the gift of Bagshot Park was expected, it was still a nice way to show his thanks and encourage him to keep supporting the crown. It also seemed to say that the Queen wanted Edward to play a lasting part in the future of the organization, even though everyone was still looking at Charles, William, and Harry. As Andrew turned the page to the next one, the room felt even more tense than before. The previous bequests had caused both pride and pain. They showed that the Queen had given them a lot of thought, care, and maybe even a desire to find balance. But they also brought up feelings that had been pushed down for a long time. The Queen didn't pick favorites. She had made choices for herself based on her own thoughts, and not what other people thought. Catherine got a tiara not just because it was pretty, but also because of what it stood for. Harry got a silver box not because it was the right thing to do, but because it had meaning. It wasn't titles that Anne and Edward were given, but duty. There was no doubt that the Queen thought about her legacy in more than just material terms. She also thought about the parts her family would play after she died. The reading of the will had begun as an official event for the royal family, but now it's much more personal. The Queen's carefully chosen words showed that she was a strong woman who knew her family's problems, strengths, and difficulties. She had picked to honor service, help people get better, and maybe give advice from beyond the grave. There had already been a few emotional and surprising moments during the reading of Queen Elizabeth II's will. Every gift and message, from Catherine getting the Vladimir tiara, to Prince Harry being given a silver box that used to belong to King George VI, to Princess Anne gaining Sandringham, had more than just a monetary value. Now that there were only a few pages left, Prince Andrew went to the part of the will that talked about the Queen's great-grandchildren and the next generation of the royal family. Up until now, the will had focused on personal choices and actions that meant something. But what came next made it clear that the Queen wasn't just giving away her things, she was leaving a legacy. What she said to the younger royals would be just as important as any title or land. Andrew carefully read the next few lines. Prince George and Princess Charlotte are the children of Prince William and Catherine. The Queen wrote them special notes. George and Charlotte got more than just family heirlooms from her. She gave them knowledge. In her words, she seemed to want to share the knowledge she had learned from working hard her whole life. It wasn't about land or jewelry. It was meant to get them ready for what was to come. As the second in line to the throne, George would one day have to deal with the same demands and pressures that she had. She told him something in a soft but clear way. She wanted him to know that being a leader wouldn't always be easy, but it could be worth it if you did it with care, kindness, and a sense of duty. Charlotte heard from the Queen a message of strength and kindness. It was based on the Queen's own experience as a young woman who was quickly put in charge. She told Charlotte that being a member of the royal family wasn't about being perfect, but about being there, listening, and being a rock when things were going wrong. Even though these words were meant for the future, they affected everyone in the room right away. William and Catherine sat quietly and watched as the will named their children. It was said that Catherine took a big breath during this part of the reading. While the Queen had always shown her great-grandchildren love, this made it real in a new way. The Queen was not only looking back, she was also looking ahead. Her will showed that she thought George and Charlotte would be very important to the future of the kingdom. In addition to the stress of being a potential king, Prince William now had to deal with the fact that his children were being involved in these talks before they were supposed to be. The government was always about getting the next generation ready, but this made it more personal. Not only him, but also his children, had been given the job by the Queen. The Queen then talked about Prince Louis, who was the youngest child of William and Catherine. He wasn't old enough to fully understand his place in the royal system when she died because he was still very young. Still, the Queen hadn't forgotten about him. She left Louis a letter written by hand, just for him. The will said that the letter was a personal guide for him to read when he was older, but it wasn't made public what it said. Writing the letter in her own style would help her and make her feel better. At this point, Catherine felt very sad. She knew that Louis would find this letter very useful in the years to come. There was more to it than just a keepsake. It was a link to his great-grandmother that he might not fully remember. Nobody in the room forgot this part of the will. It showed that Queen Elizabeth had given each family member a lot of thought, no matter how old they were or what role they played in public. She thought about how each person could grow, fight, and find their place even in her last words. Taking care of the youngest royals showed that she believed in continuity and the idea that the government, like any family, needs to plan for the future. There was more, though. When Andrew turned the page to the next one, he found another surprise. Another gift for Prince Harry. He already had the metal box with King George VI's letters in it that the Queen had given him. and now she had added something even more important: King George VI's royal sword. It was said that the room became very quiet. This sword wasn't just an old artifact, it was a sign of power, strength, and service. The late King George VI wore it on important state events, and it was a sign of honor and duty. It was a surprise to give it to Harry, especially since he chose to take a break from his official royal tasks. People clearly responded to this choice. It was said that William's face got serious. While the reading was going on, he tried to stay objective, but this bequest made it hard. Charles also looked like he was upset. The ceremonial sword was more than just a personal item to keep. It stood for custom and trust. Many people thought it was strange to give something so important to a family member who had turned away from royal duties. Many people later thought that the Queen's choice to include Harry in this way might have been an attempt to help him get along with the rest of the family. It could have also been a direct sign to him, reminding him that he was still a part of the family story no matter where he lived or what he did. Anne was always calm and didn't show much feeling, but even she must have known how important the move was. The Queen didn't make a clear line between those who stayed and those who left. She was making choices based on more than just how she looked in public. Maybe she knew that family is more important than following the rules. This choice, however, wasn't forgotten. Reports say that some members of the royal family had a hard time with it. Some of them thought that giving the sword to Harry might have sent the wrong message because they knew what it meant. Some people had a different opinion. They thought it was the Queen's last chance to heal wounds and give a way back to unity. As Prince Andrew read on, he finally got to a very personal part of the will that talked about the Queen's secret collection of letters, diaries, and other writings. These weren't supposed to be shared with anyone. They were only to be given to King Charles. This was a very important act. The Queen was known for taking great care of how people saw her, but only a few people outside of her close group knew what she really thought. People said that these works were her thoughts on the events in the world, her family, and her own rule. She was giving Charles a look into her thoughts by giving them to him. This was much more valuable than any title or estate. People in the room said Charles's response was quiet but intense. His whole life he had been waiting for the throne. Now that it was finally his, the Queen was giving him the power to see her deepest thoughts. That present was very special to him, and it might have changed how he did his job as king. By this time, the will had covered almost every member of the royal family. But it wasn't just about gifts or duties. It showed that the Queen wanted to find a balance between tradition and personal expression, between rewarding people for their dedication and keeping in touch with those who had left. It showed that people thought the monarchy's strength wasn't in its castles or crowns, but in the people who carried on its ideals. In her last wishes, the Queen didn't just want gifts or symbolic actions. There were principles, unity, and a legacy at stake. She had died, which meant the end of an age. This last part of her will showed that she had a deep understanding of the problems her family would face in the future. They would now be in charge of what she had built over her 70-year rule. And even though she wasn't there physically, her impact was still strong. Andrew's voice got a little softer as he read out loud the Queen's last words. These weren't important news or gifts for a ceremony. Instead, they were messages about what she really wanted her family to remember: her desire to serve, her strong desire for togetherness, and her hope for peace among them. The will says that her last personal message was meant for the whole royal family, not just one person. It wasn't about splitting up things anymore. It was about keeping something together. As time went on, she wrote, disagreements and personal choices had grown between family members, but she still believed in the strength of their blood ties and shared past. She told them she hoped they wouldn't let old hurts decide their future. These were the words she picked with care. It wasn't like she pretended everything was fine. She said there had been arguments and disappointment, and the world had seen more of their personal problems than any family would have liked. The monarchy is only as strong as the people who stand behind it and the people who support each other through it, she wrote. This wasn't a call to be completely loyal. It was a call for fairness and a different point of view. As the world around them changed all the time, she told her family to remember that their roles and duties were there to serve, guide, and give them a sense of stability. It wasn't castles or rituals that made the institution strong, she told them. It was relationships, both within the family and with other people. In a different way, these words were strong. In a family where status, appearance, and public duty had always been very important, the Queen's message was very personal. Her kids and grandkids were told to be kind, listen to each other, and not let their pride get in the way of moving forward. It was especially hard for King Charles to hear these words. He had been waiting decades to become king and had trained for the job with discipline and patience. But in his mother's last message, there was a clear but subtle warning that he would not be able to run things without being watched. He would not take over all of her power. Instead, he would take over the obligations she left behind. Charles sat still with his hands folded and paid close attention. What people there said about him said that his face stayed calm, but his stance was different. In royal life, there was always a lot of duty, but this was different. Not only did he have a title, but he also had his mother's final wishes, which came with direction and limits. As always, Princess Anne took in the Queen's word quietly. She had never been in charge of getting praise or attention, but she was often the steady force behind a lot of the monarchy's work. By giving her Sandringham, her mother knew that, and now this last message only confirmed what Anne had always thought. Duty came before personal desire. The message felt just as personal to William and Catherine. It was thought by many that they were the monarchy's future. Their children were already named in the Queen's will, making it clear that she saw them as the next generation of leaders. But being included also meant being under fire. William had grown up seeing how hard things were for his father and grandma. Now he knew that the same things were starting to be expected of him and his family. The Queen's last words seemed to agree with this. She didn't give instructions or requests. Instead, she left a message of support. They were reminded that leadership would change and must adapt to the needs of the time. It would be their job to lead the monarchy into a future that was very different from the one she had received. Then there was Harry. Having him in the Queen's will had already made a lot of people feel different things. The silver box and the formal sword were both very important to him, especially since he had decided to step down as king. Some people thought that was the end of it. But the Queen's last word was also for him. She didn't ignore the decisions he had made or the stress that followed. She didn't close the door, though. Family would always be more important than jobs or titles, and she wrote that being able to forgive was a sign of strength, not weakness. She said she hoped that understanding and time could bring people back together, even if their lives had gone in different directions. It was said that Harry had a quiet moment. People in the room didn't know how he felt because he didn't say anything. But what the Queen said had changed him and everyone else. When Andrew was done reading, there was silence in the room again. What had been said just now weighed heavily in the air. No one spoke right away. The will began as a formal document but ended up being something much more powerful. A final message from a queen who had spent her whole life serving and now wants her family to get along without her. After that, members of the royal family quietly went their different ways over the next few hours and days. Some people went back to their homes. Some people stayed behind and lingered in secret areas of Buckingham Palace. Not a single big argument or statement was made. But now something was different. Now that they had heard the Queen's last words, it was up to them to decide what to say. It's possible that there were long-ago conversations going on behind closed doors. Someone may have said sorry, or at least acknowledged what happened. The Queen's will made people feel things that they couldn't ignore. It wasn't a message of order, it was a message of hope. She didn't ask for forgiveness. It was all she asked for, the chance of it happening. For the world, only a few things were ever confirmed as true. The royal family stays out of the public eye during very important times, and this was no different. On the other hand, people close to the family said that the Queen's will had at least reminded them of what was important. In the end, her legacy wasn't just the pieces of property she left behind or the jewels she gave away. It could be seen in the way she talked about the future, with unity, kindness, and the hope that even the most difficult families can find a way to move on. As the room finally got empty and the will's pages were folded up and put away, one thing was still clear. The Queen had told the last truth. Now it was her family's turn to carry it on, not because they had to, but because they loved, respected, and learned from her.